It is the 19th of September, 1944. Twilight settles over the Siegfried Line, southwest of Aachen. I can still smell the mix of stale sweat, sharp cordite, and thick diesel smoke trapped inside the cramped turret of our M4A1 Sherman. The red combat lights cast deep shadows across the steel. Above me, leaning out of the commander's hatch, stands Sergeant Lafayette Poole. He is wearing his worn leather cowboy boots instead of standard combat footwear, his foot resting lightly on the shoulder of our gunner, Corporal Willis Aller. Aller has those permanent black rings of grease and grime ground into the skin around his eyes from his tactical goggles. A burst of dry static cracks through our headsets, carrying the forward order. The massive Ford V8 radial engine idles beneath us, vibrating straight through the floor grates into my boots. Then an ear-splitting metallic crack shatters the air. The horizon tilts. Sparks rain down from the turret ring. What happens next changes everything. They tell you a tank is just a steel coffin waiting for a single spark. But for 81 days in the summer of 1944, we were the spark. I am going to show you exactly how a tall Texas ex-boxer and his crew of misfits turned the supposed vulnerability of the American Sherman into a lethal, close-quarters weapon. You will understand the counterintuitive tactic of shrinking the distance that allowed us to beat German Panthers head-on. You will see why the internal wet stowage system engineered into our hulls changed the survival math for every crew member riding inside. And you will discover the cold mechanical reality of Poole's final engagement, the one that Hollywood fiction chose to ignore. This is the anatomy of tactical aggression at the bleeding edge of the 3rd Armored Division. If you want the version of this war that they do not put in textbooks, stay with me. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. To understand the toll of those 81 days, you have to look at the mathematics of the vanguard. We led the advance from the Normandy bridgehead in July straight toward the German border. The 3rd Armored Division earned the name Spearhead, but riding the tip of that spear meant bleeding first. The casualty rates for lead tank crews outpaced almost every other combat role. You lived with the constant numb vibration of the engine and the sweet, sick smell of hydraulic fluid in your nose. Every time we pushed forward, we knew the heavy German armor sat waiting in ambush positions, sighted in from over 1,000 meters away. Our doctrine demanded extreme mobility to counter their thick frontal armor and high-velocity guns. We could not trade shots from a distance. The only way to win was to press the gas pedal down and drive straight into the crosshairs before they could calculate the firing solution. That kind of survival required a specific breed of crew. The reality of armored combat in the French bocage and the open plains was nothing like the neat, organized lines you see in archive reels. Bocage means dense hedgerows, earthen walls packed thick with centuries of roots, turning every farm field into a blind arena. Engagements happened at terrifyingly short distances, frequently under 400 meters. At that range, the German Panther and Tiger tanks held a heavy advantage. Their frontal armor plates were thick enough to shatter our standard armor-piercing rounds, and their optics allowed them to dominate any open sight line. If we slowed down or tried to match them in a stationary gun duel, the math favored their high-velocity cannons every single time. Our survival depended entirely on flanking maneuvers, shooting on the move, and maintaining a frantic, fluid pace. We had to trust our mechanical reliability to outmaneuver machines that weighed 20 tons more than ours. That constant forward momentum demanded an aggressive commander who refused to stop. Staff Sergeant Lafayette G. Poole was a 25-year-old former regional boxing champion from Texas, tall, lean, and wired with a quiet intensity. He possessed a standing order that defined our entire operational rhythm. If you see their muzzle flash, you are already close enough. Go closer. The Army offered him an officer's commission, but he turned it down flat because accepting the bars meant leaving us behind. He commanded Company the 1 of the 32nd Armored Regiment, and he called his crew his pups. We were a collection of misfits shaped by the dirt and noise of the proving grounds in England. Our driver, Corporal Wilbert Richards, was a compact man, standing just 1 meter and 62 centimeters tall. Poole used to boast that Baby Richards could parallel park our massive Sherman in the center of New York traffic. At 17, Private First Class Bertrand Close, our bow gunner, still had peach fuzz on his cheeks. We fought for Poole, and he fought to keep us breathing. Rounding out the turret crew was our loader, Technician 5th grade Delbert Boggs. We called him Jailbird because the rumor going around the motor pool claimed he had to choose between enlisting in the Army or sitting in a prison cell. He threw 75-millimeter shells into the breach with a fast, heavy rhythm. We landed in Normandy in late June, bringing our first tank into the combat zone near Villiers-Fossard. It was a standard M4A1 Sherman. Poole ordered us to paint the words "In the Mood" on the side of the hull, with no identifying numbers. The fresh paint smelled sharp over the scent of hot grease. Our 75-millimeter gun fired an effective high-explosive shell for clearing infantry, but it lacked the velocity to punch through heavy German steel. We had to rely on the gyro stabilizer, a basic electrical system that let Oller keep the sights roughly on target while Richards pushed the tank over uneven ground. The real test came just days later. On the 29th of June, the close-quarters nature of the bocage caught up with us. We were pushing through thick vegetation, the tracks grinding against roots and stones, when a German infantry unit engaged us at point-blank range. The crack of a Panzerfaust-shaped charge weapon is a sound that sets your teeth on edge. The warhead slammed into the armor of our first "In the Mood." The concussive wave punched through the steel, instantly filling the fighting compartment with blinding dust and the acrid smell of burning explosives. We bailed out of the hatches in seconds, scrambling away from the hull before the internal ammunition could cook off. The tank was a total loss, left burning in the French dirt. We escaped without a single injury, standing in the mud and staring back at the smoldering metal. Poole did not say much, just gathered his pups and started walking back to the rally point. We needed a new machine to get back into the fight. 2 days later, on the 1st of July, the Ordnance Depot handed us our second tank, In the Mood 2. This time, we received an upgraded model, the M4A176W. The long barrel of the 76-millimeter high-velocity gun extended far past the front slope, shifting the vehicle's center of gravity. This weapon gave us the kinetic energy required to penetrate the flank armor of a Panther. But the most vital change was hidden inside the hull, designated by the letter W. This stood for wet stowage. In the older models, dry ammunition bins lined the upper side sponsons, right where enemy gunners aimed. When hot shrapnel hit those dry casings, the propellant detonated, trapping crews in a wall of fire. The engineers moved our 76-millimeter shells down to the floor under the turret basket. They surrounded these floor racks with double-walled jackets filled with 38 gallons of water mixed with ethylene glycol and rust inhibitor. It changed the math of surviving a hit. That chemical mixture was called Ammudamp. If an enemy armor-piercing shell penetrated our lower hull and struck the ammunition bins, the impact would rupture the liquid jackets, flooding the compartment and dousing the hot propellant. Before a flash fire could consume the turret, the statistics proved the engineering. The massive fire rate upon penetration dropped from 60 to 80% in dry hulls, down to a mere 10 to 15% in our wet stowage tanks. We knew we were sitting on top of dozens of high explosive rounds, but having that liquid barrier beneath our boots provided a cold, rational comfort. The technical balance was restored. We had a gun that could reach through German steel and a hull designed to give us crucial seconds to escape if we lost the armor duel. With the upgraded tank dialed in, Poole intensified our operational tempo. He trained Richards to manipulate the controls based on a single, aggressive rule of engagement that went against every instinct. There is a stubborn, widespread belief that the Sherman tank was nothing but an incendiary death trap, useless against superior German engineering, and mockingly called a Ronson by the men who drove it. The facts tell a different story. The early models did catch fire, but it was due to ammunition placement, not the type of fuel we used. The wet stowage models we operated corrected that fatal flaw. Furthermore, the Sherman stood as the most mechanically reliable tank of the entire conflict. Our Ford engine and powertrain allowed Company the House to traverse hundreds of kilometers across Europe, hunting the retreating enemy relentlessly. Meanwhile, dozens of heavy German Panthers broke their own complex transmissions just trying to retreat, collapsing under their massive weight. We fought in a machine built for strategic mobility and endurance, outlasting the over-engineered armor of the enemy. I want to know what you actually thought the Sherman was before you heard this. Drop it in the comments. Poole understood the physical limitations of the enemy armor. A German Panther possessed exceptional frontal plating, but its mechanical turret drive required roughly 15 full seconds to rotate the gun 360 degrees. If the engine speed dropped, that rotation took even longer. Our Sherman turret could snap around in a fraction of that time. Poole drilled this mechanical geometry into our heads. When an enemy round snapped past our hull, our doctrine was not to reverse into cover. Instead, Richards would slam the throttle forward, accelerating directly toward the muzzle flash in a jagged, zigzag pattern. While the German gunner cranked his slow hand wheels trying to track our erratic movement, Oller used the electric gyro stabilizer to keep our 76-millimeter gun leveled at their flank. We closed the distance, nullifying their range advantage, and fired on the move before they could reset their sights. We used speed as our primary armor, relying on shock action to overwhelm their gunners. By August, we were operating in the Falaise pocket, cutting off the retreat of the German 7th Army. The roads were choked with destroyed vehicles, dead draft horses, and desperate infantry trying to escape the encirclement. We pushed in the Mood II to its mechanical limits, firing until the heavy breech of the main gun radiated a blistering heat inside the cramped turret. We accumulated dozens of destroyed enemy vehicles during this sprint. The sensory fatigue began to mount. The constant crack of the cannon, the smell of burnt powder, and the sight of shattered columns wore down our nerves. There was a moment, pressing through the wreckage, when Poole keyed his throat microphone and broadcasted a rare transmission over the radio network. He looked at the retreating columns and told command that he did not have the heart to kill them. It was a brief crack in the armor of a man focused entirely on the grim mathematics of the advance. The greatest threat in the Falaise pocket did not come from German 88s, but from our own skies. Mid-August brought chaotic, overlapping front lines, making target identification nearly impossible from the air. We were advancing in a tight armored column when an American P-38 Lightning fighter dropped out of the clouds, misidentifying our position. The aircraft strafed our column, the heavy machine gun rounds tearing into the engine deck of In the Mood 2. The impact shattered the engine components and triggered secondary fires. Once again, Poole shouted the order to evacuate. We scrambled out of the smoking hatches, hitting the dirt as our own air support circled above. We watched our second Sherman burn down to the axles. Escaping 2 destroyed tanks without a single casualty felt like bending the laws of probability. We walked away without a scratch, but the near misses gnawed at our focus. We received In the Mood 3, another 76mm wet stowage model, and kept pushing east. September arrived, and the race across Belgium pushed the speedometer to the maximum. We rolled through Namur and Liège without pausing for rest. The fine summer dust coated everything inside the hull, mixing with the grease on Olaire's goggles and gritting between our teeth. We lived on cold rations, sleeping in fragmented 2-hour shifts while slouched against the cold steel of the ammunition racks. Poole received orders offering a rotation to the rear, a chance to rest after leading the spearhead for months. He refused it instantly. He would not leave the driver's seat empty, and he would not let a new commander lead his pups into the border defenses. The official tally of enemy vehicles and anti-tank guns we had disabled or destroyed was climbing past 200. The law of averages was pressing down hard on In the Mood 3. What happens next took less than 4 seconds. 4 seconds that ended 81 days. The geography shifted as we hit the German border. The open fields of France and Belgium gave way to the dense fortified choke points of the Siegfried Line. Concrete dragon's teeth tank traps jutted from the soil, forcing our columns into narrow pre-sighted killing zones. Heavy pillboxes lay camouflaged beneath thick layers of earth and vegetation. The speed and mobility that kept us alive through the summer meant nothing in these tight, engineered funnels. We had to grind forward at a crawling pace, probing the defenses with high explosive fire. On the late afternoon of the 19th of September, our vanguard approached the industrial town of Münsterbusch. The twilight cast long, deceptive shadows across the uneven ground. Visibility dropped to a few hundred meters. We sat idling in the gloom, the steady vibration of the Ford V8 humming through the floor grates. Poole stood in the commander's cupola, his torso exposed, scanning the tree line with his binoculars. The trap was already set. At approximately 1800 hours, the darkness cracked open with a bright orange muzzle flash from a concealed German position. Whether it was an entrenched Panther or a dug-in 88mm anti-tank gun, the result was instantaneous. The heavy armor-piercing shell covered the distance faster than the sound of its own firing. It slammed right into the side of In the Mood 3. The kinetic energy transfer was massive. The entire 30-ton tank lurched sideways. Sparks and hot metal fragments bounced off the interior walls. The thick steel of the turret suffered immediate plastic deformation from the sheer force of the strike. Aller grabbed his hand cranks, trying to swing our 76-millimeter gun around to return fire, but the heavy blow had jammed the turret ring. The gears were locked solid. We were blind on our flank, unable to rotate the main weapon, trapped in a narrow avenue with a heavy gun dialing in its second shot. With the turret jammed, our primary tactic of closing the distance and firing on the move fell apart. If we drove forward, we could not bring the gun to bear. Poole leaned over the hatch rim, yelling into the throat microphone for Richards to throw the transmission into reverse and back us out of the kill zone. But shifting a Sherman from forward gear into reverse under heavy fire consumes precious seconds. Richards wrestled the levers, the gearbox grinding as he fought to pull us backward. For 80 days, our aggressive forward momentum had saved our lives. Now, locked in the mud of the Siegfried line, that same forward positioning placed us squarely in the crosshairs with nowhere to maneuver. The enemy gunner did not have to track a moving target. He only had to adjust his elevation slightly and pull the lanyard. The hiss of the incoming second round cut through the roar of our idling engine. The second shell struck the chassis with a deafening metallic thunderclap. The kinetic shock wave tore through the armor plate, detonating directly against the structural frame of the hull. The force of the impact physically kicked the tank backward. Standing tall in the open commander's hatch, Poole absorbed the unfiltered displacement of the blast. The physics of the explosion acted like a giant lever, physically ejecting his tall frame out of the cupola. He flew through the air, propelled away from the heavy steel turret, and crashed hard into the cold German mud. Inside the fighting compartment, the noise was paralyzing. We waited for the inevitable flash of the propellant igniting, the wall of fire that usually followed a direct, deep penetration. But the fire never came. The wet stowage system held. The ammu-damp fluid absorbed the heat, preventing the internal magazine from cooking off and giving the four of us inside the crucial seconds we needed to bail out. American infantry units pushed forward, laying down suppressive fire on the German gun position. Richards, Close, Aller, and Boggs scrambled out of the smoking hatches of our third ruined Sherman. We hit the ground running and found Poole lying in the dirt. His right leg was shattered, mangled by a mix of heavy shrapnel and the massive force of his impact with the earth. Dark blood pooled into the wet soil around him. Field medics rushed up, dropping to their knees to crank a tourniquet high on his thigh. Poole never lost consciousness. He lay there, his teeth gritted against the pain, swearing loudly not about his ruined leg, but about the loss of his tank and the abrupt end to his combat tour. He knew his war was over. The medics strapped him to a canvas litter, lifting him away from the burning steel of In the Mood 3. Just like that, our crew of misfits was permanently disbanded. They carried Poole to a field hospital behind the lines. The trauma to his leg was too extensive, and massive infections quickly set into the shredded muscle and shattered bone. Within days, the surgeons amputated his right leg high above the knee to save his life. While he was on the operating table, doctors extracted 17 distinct pieces of steel shrapnel embedded deeply into his neck and shoulders. He survived the operating room with the same stubborn endurance he used to command a tank. The rest of us were reassigned to new vehicles and new commanders, feeding back into the grinder of the 3rd Armored Division's push into Germany. But none of us ever found the same mechanical rhythm we had under the tall Texan. Poole was gone, but the combat record he left behind in those 81 days forced the military establishment to reevaluate exactly what an aggressive crew could accomplish inside a standard medium tank. Lafayette Poole concluded his European tour with 258 destroyed enemy vehicles and anti-tank guns to his name. That tally included 12 confirmed pure armored kills against German tanks, the capture of 250 prisoners, and over 1,000 enemy casualties inflicted. He earned the informal title of the American Tank Ace of Aces. Decades later, a Hollywood movie called Fury featured a commander nicknamed War Daddy. But the real Lafayette Poole never commanded a late-war Easy 8. His tank was never named Fury, and he did not die defending a lonely crossroads. He lost his leg in a standard vanguard ambush, a mathematical certainty for anyone riding the tip of the spear for that long. His actual story requires no cinematic embellishment. He proved that high mobility, a rapid rate of fire, and extreme tactical aggression could dismantle an enemy force relying entirely on heavy, static armor and superior optics. The Army awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, and the Purple Heart. But Poole was not finished with armored warfare. In 1948, fitted with a heavy mechanical prosthetic leg, he achieved the impossible. He fought his way back onto active duty, returning to the Army as a senior instructor of armored tactics and mechanics at Fort Knox. He took the hard lessons learned in the Bocage and the Siegfried Line and taught them to a new generation of tank commanders. The military studied his specific insistence on flanking mobility, the necessity of shooting accurately on the move, and the rapid target acquisition that kept us alive. Those exact tactical principles directly influenced the engineering parameters for the future main battle tanks, eventually leading to the design of the M1 Abrams. He taught them that hardware is secondary. The lethal component of any tank is the cohesive crew operating inside it. 3 different Shermans, all bearing the exact same name, pushed to the very edge of mechanical destruction. We burned out the main gun barrels, pushed the massive Ford V8 engines well past their red lines, and trusted a thin layer of chemical liquid beneath our boots to keep us from burning alive. Lafayette Poole did not survive those 81 days by being cautious. He survived by turning the American Sherman into a relentless close-range brawler, dragging his crew through continuous combat until the mathematical odds finally caught up to us in the cold mud outside Münsterbusch. When I close my eyes today, I do not see the silver medals or the thick tactical manuals. I just smell the sharp hydraulic fluid, feel the heavy, numb vibration of the steel tracks, and see those worn leather cowboy boots standing tall in the commander's hatch, pointing us straight into the enemy muzzle flashes. If this story deserved to be told, make sure someone else gets to hear it.